What if a nation, once labeled high risk, suddenly became the new standard of financial integrity in Africa? This is not a fantasy. This is the story of Burkina Faso. On October 24, 2025, in a quiet room in Paris, the Financial Action Task Force FATF announced something few global headlines captured, but which carried seismic significance. Burkina Faso was officially removed from the Grey List. After 4 years of international scrutiny, financial suspicion, and near-complete institutional overhaul, the country, once seen as a liability in the fight against money laundering and terrorism financing, had achieved full compliance. To some, it was just a line in a report. To Burkina Faso, it was redemption. It was the moment when spreadsheets became shields, when legislation became liberation, and when financial transparency became national pride. This isn't just about banking regulations or anti-money laundering checkboxes. This is a story about sovereignty reclaimed not with tanks or treaties, but with policy, discipline, and unshakable integrity. It's a story that begins in crisis when billions were bleeding out through illicit mining channels and international banks began to turn their backs. It's a story that climaxes with laws written, agencies empowered, and assets frozen not for optics, but for justice. And it's a story that ends, not with applause, but with quiet, golden confidence etched into 60 tons of gold, over $500 million in remittances, and the revival of global trust. Stay with me. By the end of this video, you'll understand why Burkina Faso's transformation is not just a local success, but a continental message that the age of African accountability has truly begun. This is the story of how a gray zone became a beacon. To understand the gravity of Burkina Faso's comeback, we need to rewind to the moment it fell into financial limbo. In 2021, the Financial Action Task Force FATF added Burkina Faso to its infamous Grey List. For most people, this sounds like technical jargon, but for nations, it's the diplomatic equivalent of being put under house arrest. It means the world no longer trusts your financial system. It means you are presumed guilty of laundering money, of failing to monitor suspicious flows, of possibly funding terror not by intent, but by negligence. Why was Burkina added to this list at the time? Regulatory gaps in the mining sector, loose financial oversight, and a lack of interagency coordination raised red flags. Billions of CFA francs were vanishing annually through illicit gold exports. Remittances from abroad, vital lifelines for families, flowed through channels with minimal controls. The country wasn't alone. Across the Sahel, financial governance often played catch-up with complex global crime networks, but the consequences were uniquely harsh. Being gray-listed meant international banks began treating Burkina as a compliance nightmare. Letters of credit were delayed. Foreign investment dried up. Aid agencies started asking harder questions. Development loans came with heavier strings. Worst of all, the average Burkinabe began to feel it: fewer jobs, tighter credit, slower growth. From the outside, Burkina seemed stuck in a financial penalty box. From the inside, it felt like slow-motion economic suffocation. Then came October 2022, and with it, a military transition. At the center stood Captain IbrahimTraore, young, resolute, and deeply aware that sovereignty was no longer just a military or diplomatic issue, it was a financial one. His vision was clear: clean the system, restore credibility, and rebuild the firewall that shielded the nation from exploitation. But this would require more than speeches and slogans. It demanded laws, enforcement, coordination, and political will, the kind of reforms that rarely make headlines but change a country's destiny. This was the beginning of Burkina's quiet financial revolution. Once the diagnosis was clear, Burkina Faso moved swiftly not just to treat the symptoms of its financial ailments, but to rebuild its entire immune system. The centerpiece of this transformation was the passage of Law N.U. 046/2024 ALT. voted unanimously by the transitional legislature on December 30th, 2024. This sweeping legislation addressed not only money laundering but also terrorist financing and the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. It gave authorities the tools to freeze assets, impose targeted financial sanctions, and ensure transparency across all levels of economic activity. But a law alone does not protect a nation. Institutions do. Enter CENTIF Burkina's Financial Intelligence Unit. Originally seen as a formality, CENTIF was restructured into a fully operational, tech-enabled hub, staffed with trained analysts and backed by international technical support. CENTIF became the radar of the Burkinabe financial system, scanning for irregularities, cross-checking transactions, and connecting the dots that once allowed criminal flows to go unnoticed. In 2024 alone, CENTIF flagged hundreds of suspicious transactions. More than 100 accounts were frozen, and 113 individuals, some with links to known terrorist networks, were barred from accessing the financial system. For the first time, Burkina Faso wasn't just writing laws, it was enforcing them with precision. But no firewall stands alone. The Ministry of Economy, Justice, Security, and Commerce began operating like a command center, sharing data, conducting joint audits, and creating what one FATF official called a textbook example of inter-ministerial cooperation. Burkina's new approach wasn't reactive, it was proactive. High-risk sectors like gold mining, cash-intensive businesses, and even NGOs were placed under structured compliance review. A new national registry for beneficial ownership was launched, ensuring that no company could hide behind shell structures. Supervisors from multiple sectors began coordinating inspections. Financial institutions were given strict guidelines and deadlines. It was governance, not just government. At the regional level, Burkina deepened its ties with GIBA, the West African affiliate of FATF. Training programs, simulation exercises, and data-sharing platforms were rolled out. By the time FATF's on-site assessment team visited in August 2024, they found not a checklist of intentions, but a functioning system of action. One official remarked privately, "This is the kind of reform we expect from a country trying to join the OECD, not just stay off a blacklist." But perhaps the most remarkable element was the discipline. These reforms weren't driven by donor pressure or media scrutiny. They were born out of a belief articulated clearly by Captain IbrahimTraore that no nation is truly sovereign until it controls its own financial flows. This belief echoed through every directive, every audit, every reform memo, and it worked. On October 24, 2025, Burkina Faso was delisted from the FATF Grey List. But by then, the Grey List was the least important label. More important was the one Burkina had quietly earned for itself, a nation capable of defending its integrity not just on the battlefield, but in the vaults, banks, and ledgers that define 21st century sovereignty. This wasn't compliance, it was a campaign, a financial firewall built to last. October 24, 2025 did not bring fireworks in Ouagadougou. There were no parades, no televised speeches, but in bank offices, shipping terminals, and investment meetings. A quiet shift was underway. Being removed from the FATF Grey List was more than symbolic. It changed how Burkina Faso was seen by the world and, more importantly, how it could now participate in the global economy. The first impact, trust. Banks, especially foreign correspondent banks, began to loosen the reins. Previously, even a simple transfer involving Burkina Faso could take days, sometimes weeks, due to increased scrutiny. Now, compliance flags were down, and routine transactions began to flow more freely. Trade finance, especially letters of credit, became easier to obtain. Importers could breathe. Exporters could plan, and the data followed the sentiment. In 2023, Burkina Faso received approximately $584.4 million in remittances. These funds, sent mostly by migrant workers to families back home, had always been vital. But when financial systems are mistrusted, remittance channels become clogged or rerouted to informal paths. Post-delisting, transfer operators and mobile money platforms reported faster processing and fewer delays. In a country where nearly every household depends on someone working abroad, this wasn't just a financial improvement, it was a daily life upgrade. Then came the gold. Burkina Faso is one of Africa's largest gold producers. In 2023, it mined approximately 56.86 metric tons from 12 industrial mines, led by the massive Essakane site. For 2024, output was expected to rise to 60 tons, and with improved financial credibility, that gold became more valuable. Why? Because transparency adds value. Exporters no longer faced excessive compliance paperwork or third-party verification hurdles. International buyers, especially in Switzerland and the UAE, trusted the provenance and legitimacy of Burkina's output. Each ounce moved with less friction. Each shipment faced fewer questions. In global trade, trust equals efficiency, and efficiency equals profit. Foreign direct investment also began to thaw. In 2023, Burkina registered only $85 million in FDI, a low point due to gray listing and political uncertainty. But early 2025 saw renewed interest from mining firms, infrastructure investors, and even green energy players, sensing that the country was stabilizing not just politically, but institutionally. And let's talk about growth. According to the International Monetary Fund, Burkina's economy was projected to grow 5.5% in 2024, up from 3.6% in 2023. Inflation fell below 2%. Thanks to macroeconomic discipline and external stability. The budget deficit narrowed, and debt-to-GDP ratios began leveling out. These numbers matter because they tell lenders, donors, and partners that the ship is turning. But even more than the numbers, the perception changed. Where Burkina once appeared as a red flag jurisdiction in compliance software, it now re-entered the standard risk category. That shift, invisible to most citizens, directly impacts loan approvals, export deals, and insurance policies. It's the hidden grease that makes the machine run. Local businesses noticed. Bankers began approving more credit lines. Entrepreneurs, once shut out, found doors slightly more open. Not miracles, but momentum. This was the economic ripple effect. And yet, it wasn't just about finance. It was about dignity, about a nation standing up and saying, "We will no longer be seen as unreliable. We will earn your trust and then exceed your expectations." From the mining pits of Essakane to the remittance counters in Bobo Dioulasso, Burkina's economy didn't just get a lifeline. It got a second chance. And this time, it was holding the pen. For Burkina Faso, the war on terror has never been theoretical. It has been waged in villages, on highways, and in marketplaces where armed groups exploit cash, chaos, and fear. But behind every bullet fired, there is almost always a financial trail. That's why Burkina's removal from the FATF Grey List was not just an economic win, it was a strategic shift in its national defense. The core of this change lies in law, NACRU 046-2024 ALT. For the first time, Burkina Faso had a legal instrument that empowered authorities to freeze assets linked to terrorism, impose targeted financial sanctions, and disrupt the underground networks that kept extremist groups alive. And it wasn't just words on paper. In 2024, Burkina froze over 100 bank accounts and blocked 113 individuals suspected of financing or facilitating terror operations. Among them were intermediaries using cash-intensive sectors like gold mining and NGOs as cover for illicit activities. With CENTIF's upgraded intelligence capabilities and real-time data sharing with security agencies, Those flows were identified, intercepted, and dismantled. This was financial warfare, and Burkina was finally on the offensive. Regionally, Burkina participated in Operation CAFO 5, a multinational initiative led by the UN Office on Drugs and Crime. The operation exposed complex smuggling routes of weapons and funds through the Sahel, reinforcing just how deeply terrorism relies on shadow finance. Burkina's strengthened AML-CFT apparatus meant it could not only recognize these threats but act decisively. There is a saying among counterterrorism experts, "Stop the money, and you slow the bloodshed." For a country that has seen too much of both, FATF compliance became more than a report card. It became a shield, a way to deny oxygen to the groups trying to burn the country from within. And while the world may celebrate delisting as a bureaucratic milestone, in Burkina Faso, it was a matter of life and death. The decision to delist Burkina Faso from the FATF Grey List echoed far beyond financial circles. It was heard in diplomatic halls, regional summits, and the editorial rooms of global media. Because in a world where financial reputation is often dictated by former colonial powers, Burkina's success sent a powerful message: integrity is not a Western monopoly. International coverage reflected this shift. Reuters called it a rare African comeback in a world of rising financial scrutiny. Al Jazeera described Burkina as a quiet model of institutional resilience. Even RFI, often critical of West African militaries, acknowledged the scale of technical and legal reform. The language had changed, from doubt to respect, from critique to case study. But perhaps the biggest ripple came regionally. In 2023, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger formed the Alliance of Sahel States AES, a bloc rejecting the perceived double standards of global governance and seeking self-reliance in security, energy, and finance. Burkina's FATF success gave the AES its first proof of concept, that a Sahel country, led by a transitional military government, could meet international norms without compromising its sovereignty. Within ECOWAS, the move sparked debate. If Burkina could do it without Western aid packages or IMF structural adjustment, what does that say about regional leadership? For young reformers across Africa, it was a morale boost. For conservative elites, a quiet challenge. Non-Western partners took note, too. Russia, already cooperating with Burkina on civil nuclear projects through Rosatom, saw in the FATF delisting a new opportunity to deepen ties, offering financial technology and anti-corruption tools. China, long active in infrastructure and extractives, praised Burkina's sovereign discipline. These weren't just gestures. They were strategic realignments, signaling that Burkina had become a credible partner, not just a beneficiary. Inside Burkina, the mood was one of cautious pride. The state media replayed statements from Minister Abaka Nakanabo, emphasizing that delisting was not the end of a journey, but the start of a standard. National channels carried images of miners, bankers, soldiers, and students, each playing a part in the country's transformation. The motto: Le pays des hommes intègres. Land of upright men didn't feel like nostalgia anymore. It felt like prophecy. Because in a region where headlines are often dominated by coups, debt, and disorder, Burkina Faso had just written a different story, one of reform, one of dignity, one of quiet, undeniable progress. In the end, this was never just about a list. It was about reclaiming a name, a reputation, a future. Burkina Faso's journey from the FATF Grey List to global financial respectability is more than a case study in reform. It is a declaration that even in a region plagued by instability, there are nations choosing the harder path, the path of law, structure, and discipline. 3 victories stand out. First, financial credibility. Burkina didn't just meet the standards, it internalized them. It built systems, not slogans, institutions, not headlines. Second, national security. By choking off the financial lifelines of extremist networks, the country turned spreadsheets into shields, and in doing so, it saved lives. Third, national pride. After decades of being overlooked, underestimated, and categorized, Burkina stood up not to shout, but to show that integrity isn't given by others. It's earned. And once earned, it becomes the strongest currency of all. This story is not over. The real challenge lies ahead, maintaining vigilance, building resilience, and proving that reform can endure beyond political cycles. But for now, let's recognize what has been accomplished. To the civil servants who stayed late to draft new laws, to the analysts at CENTIF tracing invisible transactions, to the miners and farmers who believed in tomorrow, this is your victory, and to the world watching, remember this moment. Because in a world that often rewards flash over substance, Burkina Faso just reminded us that quiet progress is still possible. If you believe in the power of integrity, share this story, because every voice that amplifies it becomes a brick in the foundation of a more accountable, more sovereign Africa. From the Grey List to the Golden Trust, this is Burkina Faso, 2025.